Macy's is the latest retailer to admit to struggling in this economic climate, closing several of what it calls fulfillment centers, basically warehouses in Connecticut and Oklahoma, shedding thousands of jobs in the process. And that's on top of closing even more stores than it had last year. Why? Because only the wealthy are spending, and the company wants to focus on that one segment. And they're not alone in this. Just last week, Delta Airlines said basically the same exact thing. In fact, the exact quote from the CEO was, effectively, none of our growth in seats will be in the main cabin. They virtually all will be in the premium sector. And this is a symptom of the economy's chief problem, which is not tariff inflation or any other kind of inflation as so often is claimed. Instead, what these companies are saying is the lack of jobs and indeed the loss of jobs is impacting their main operations. There hasn't been a pullback at the upper ends of the income spectrum, but there sure has been everywhere else. That point was best illustrated and emphasized by what the BLS reported with the December jobs figures. The retail industry specifically cut an unhealthy large number of jobs in the fourth quarter, right on through the holiday season. Despite everyone's best efforts to paint Macy's actions as some kind of one-off related to its own business, that's just not the case, and we've got all the data that shows it. And going by Macy's actions and others here in early 2026, this is not going to turn around anytime soon. You wonder why everyone is talking about affordability all of a sudden? This is the reason. What Macy's is doing, what Delta is saying, and what we're seeing from the economy is that it continues to struggle more and more. It is getting worse, not getting better. The economy is getting more certain, not more uncertain. And for the majority of people in this country, times aren't just getting tough, they're getting tougher. And you don't have to tell that to Macy's. The retailer is struggling alongside its customers. Quote, Macy's is laying off 993 employees as it closes its fulfillment center in Cheshire, Connecticut, according to a WARN notification dated January 13. Macy's did not provide a reason for the closure, which isn't the only shutdown happening in Connecticut. The company may not have provided a reason for the shutdown, but we don't really need them to. If you're thinking the stock market is the economy, then sure, this doesn't seem to make sense, or you make it some specific issue with Macy's. Now, to be fair, the retailer has been trying to turn its business around for the last year plus, but the reason why that was needed in the first place is forgot how to grow. Macy's is every bit a victim of the lack of recovery in the U.S. economy after the lockdowns, as is the majority of its customers. So it's not just the warehouse in Connecticut either. Quote, Macy's plans to close a fulfillment center in Tulsa, Oklahoma this spring, a company spokesperson told Supply Chain Dive in an email. After careful consideration, we've made the decision to close our supply chain facility in Tulsa as part of our ongoing work to modernize our supply chain to better serve our customers while simplifying how we operate. Macy's first announced plans for the direct-to-consumer fulfillment facility, which is located in Owasso in Tulsa County, back in 2013, with the site going live in 2015. At the time of the announcement, the 1.3 million square foot warehouse was expected to employ approximately 1,500 full and part-time employees, as well as another 1,000 temporary seasonal associates. So while there hasn't been any announcement or confirmation about how many positions will be eliminated in Oklahoma, it's clearly going to be more than just one or two here. And combine that with Connecticut, that's a lot of jobs being cut. And as we'll see, these are not the one-offs everyone wants you to believe. It extends for Macy's into store closures too. It's not just these fulfillment centers. Let's go to another article. Quote, the retailer is set to shutter multiple stores across the country this year, following a 2024 decision, forgot how to grow, to streamline operations. At that time, the retailer outlined a plan that consisted of focusing resources by closing approximately 150 unproductive locations, including approximately 50 by the end of the fiscal year, and prioritizing investment in approximately 350 go-forward locations and the continued expansion of small format stores. In an updated memo to colleagues at the start of 2026, Macy's Executive Vice President Tony Spring shared that the company will continue to downsize as needed. In executing our strategy, we continue to review our portfolio and make careful decisions about where and how we invest, including closing underproductive stores and streamlining operations. These targeted changes allow us to focus where it will have the greatest impact, reimagining our best stores, enhancing customer service, expanding our luxury business, and advancing our supply chain capabilities. And there it is. expanding our luxury business, plus, as the VP said, advancing supply chain capabilities to do what? To serve less than the regular customers and service more of those who will still be spending and buying. What the mainstream calls this two-speed economy or K-shaped economy, when neither of those is really accurate. However, the business behind the idea is at least widespread. Just last week, for example, Delta Airlines kicked off earnings season at the stock market with less than ideal forecasts. Why? The same troubling trend. Quote, as the first major U.S. airline to report earnings, investors look to Delta for signs on the strength of the industry. The carrier's relatively tepid forecast stands in contrast with the CEO's optimism at the start of last year. At the same time, Bastian, who's Delta CEO, said demand for high-spending consumers continues to be strong. Delta has touted its premium products in the cabin and on the ground as it seeks to differentiate itself from budget carriers and appeal to well-heeled flyers. Effectively, none of our growth in seats will be in the main cabin, Bastian said. They virtually all will be in the premium sector. And it's this type of sick economic environment that is feeding the credit cycle. In fact, we've been talking about this entire time. Flatter beverage means more potential delinquencies, more hidden losses that aren't being uncovered and being admitted to the public, more fears among investors that maybe they're going to get stuck with losses they don't want or they were promised would never happen. Downswing in the credit cycle is very much tied to what's taking place in the labor market, the consumer economy, what we're hearing in Macy's, Delta, and getting in all the information like the BLS. So next month, President's Day weekend, February 2026, join me, Eurodollar University Live. There's a couple of VIP spots left, just a couple left. So if you want to be one of those VIP slots, there's a link in the description to sign up for that. If you want to come on Monday, just the Monday seminar, President's Day itself, including a free ticket to Monday, if you sign up for Eurodollar University's DDA plus all subscription. There's details in the link in the description as well. Join me, Mike Green, Hugh Hendry, George Gammon, Brent Johnson, and of course, Steve Van Metre himself. Here's your chance to have a small discussion with some of the smartest and most experienced people in the business, talking about all the most important topics that have come up and that are going to likely continue to come up in 2026. So again, there's a link in the description to sign up. Eurodollar University Live, President's Day weekend. I really hope to see you there. It's going to be huge. It's going to be big. It's going to be fun, educational, and most of all, important. Again, higher incomes are spending and keeping the economy afloat just enough that it covers up all these growing trouble spots on down the line. But it's gotten to the point where these companies aren't seeing any recovery below the premium sector, as Delta calls it, or the luxury segment from Macy's. That's why they're changing their operations, their sales and their marketing strategies and everything else, simply because they know, we know it in their actions, they know there is no comeback on the horizon. If anything, the problems across the majority of the economy outside of premium and luxury, those are only getting worse, which is why Delta didn't want to say too much about what it thinks will happen in 2026. Even if the wealthy spend the same rates that they have, it might not be enough to balance out the loss of revenue from middle and lower income Americans, the continued loss of revenue. And that thought is exactly why Macy's is cutting warehouses and more stores. Focus on the top, but you can't ignore everyone else like the stock market does. And the data shows that retailers specifically aren't ignoring what's happening with everyone else, despite the glowing assessments of the 2025 Christmas holiday season. And by the way, every year you get the same assessments. Christmas is always a knockout, blowout, whatever qualifier you want to add. They always say the same thing. Despite those qualifications and those glowing assessments, the behavior of retailers themselves looks far more like Macy's than anything else. Even the BLS shows retailers sure didn't behave as if it was a positive holiday season. Remember, the numbers that we're going to go over here are from the establishment survey, meaning they are still significantly overstated. So despite these job counts being generous, the BLS says retail industry positions were being cut big time in each of the 3 months during the fourth quarter, the all-important holiday season. Yet here's the retail industry losing a combined 66,000 jobs during it, which is a huge loss for this one industry. Now, it may not be 2009 levels, which I kind of think too many people have in their mind is what all recessions look like. But that kind of job shedding, especially when consumer economy keeps being said to be holding up really well, This is indeed a massive red flag. The data backs up Macy's is not just some isolated case. The entire industry, which should have been staffing up as if business was brisk instead of going in the other direction, shifting priorities, fully aware of what's actually resilient in the economy and how for the vast majority, it's not resilient. And that goes way beyond just jobs in the retail industry. It goes all across the entire economy. When you take account of a couple of industries, a couple of sectors, what you see is flat beverage everywhere. So we're getting not only the consequences downstream from flat beverage, we're also getting more and more confirmation of it. For 2025, again, sticking with the pre-benchmark revision establishment survey, so the most charitable view of job counts, the BLS shows, get this, only 584,000 for the entire year. That's across all industries and categories, not even 600,000. And again, we already know that's too high. The reality was substantially worse. And just to give you some context, the worst year during the dismal silent depression 2010s was 2010 itself. And even that year managed to recover a little over 1 million payrolls, despite losing a bunch of them in the first few months of the year as the Great Not Recession lingered on into 2010. Even in 2007, that one produced more than 1.1 million payroll gains, which wasn't good at all because that was the doorstep of the Great Not Recession to begin with. And go back to 2000, just before the dot-com recession in 2001. In the year 2000, while the dot-com bust was still unfolding, it was still happening, there was an increase of 1.9 million. So you get the point. No matter how you want to characterize it, 584,000 is bad, straight away, full stop. By any honest interpretation, that's an economy that's in big trouble. But then you start digging further into the details, and what becomes clear is more traditional recession flat beverage data and confirmation. Not just too little as far as job increases, but outright job losses in all the critical middle income areas. Now take healthcare and education, for example. These aren't exactly the top opportunities you might imagine when you hear those terms. We aren't talking about, doctors and surgeons or high-value researchers at top productive universities. For the most part, these are the lowest paying positions, nursing assistants, low-paid grad assistants doing all the schoolwork, low-level administrators at that kind of thing. So if you exclude those job gains from healthcare and education, the entire rest of the economy lost 125,000 payrolls last year, negative net losses. And you already know, the only times when you see yearly totals like that in the negative, there's a recession in those years. Go back to 2007. That year still managed 600,000 jobs outside of healthcare and education, which was already a huge red flag. 600,000 positive. And that was a recession indication all its own. Here in 2025, we've got minus 125,000, which was, again, almost certainly a much bigger negative when we factor in what the QCEW found out, or didn't find, as in the case seems to be here. And take it a step further, excluding leisure and hospitality industries, in other words, waiters and bartenders, again, not the best paying jobs, the net outside of those was minus 313,000, another recession level number. So what that says is outside some of the lowest paying positions, that would be waiters and bartenders and healthcare and education, the U.S. labor market lost more good jobs than not last year. Lost flat beverage. And most of those losses were concentrated in the latter months of the year, like we saw in the retail segment. So why are consumers in lower and middle income struggling so much? They don't have any jobs. These might not be huge negatives. It might not look like 2009, but the fact that they're less than zero already, and likely a lot less than zero when we get to revisions, that means no one was hiring either. No good jobs hired, more than a few being fired. And then a chilling effect all throughout the rest of the economy outside of that very top income segment. It's always jobs and incomes, and the data shows they aren't there. On the contrary, the situation continues to get worse as 2026 starts. That's exactly what Macy's and Delta and a whole bunch of other companies are saying. And it gets to be the biggest part of all this is what I just said, is that, everybody thought that 2025, okay, there was some stuff going on in the middle of the year, but once the year ended, it would end in the right way. The economy would get back on the right foot and things would move forward into 2026, going full steam ahead, or at least heading toward going full steam ahead. But that's not what we keep hearing. That's not what we keep seeing. That's not what the data keeps showing. It was going to shake off its tariff uncertainty, regain its footing, so that by the end of the year, the labor market would be running at least going in the right direction. But that just didn't happen. It doesn't matter where you look, you find confirmation of it. What we see instead, accelerating job losses, flatter beverage, not 2009 levels again, but a clear enough shift from no hiring, no firing to no hiring, some firing. That much is confirmed, and it's confirmed all over the place, from the BLS data to what Macy said, and even Delta saying the same thing. Lower and middle income Americans not spending, not showing up at stores, not showing up on airplanes. That tells us the start of 2026 looks already too much like the end of 2025. But naturally, the question gets asked, so why are the wealthy doing so much better compared to everyone else? And the answer is pretty simple, but it goes back to the kind of dastardly damage that was done by the lockdowns and the supply shock. The surge in prices back then meant workers primarily lost the purchasing power of their work. Their labor was devalued. Now, this wasn't true for all workers, though. At top-paying, high-value jobs, compensation was higher and even high enough to offset the increases in prices. So the majority of the labor market saw cost of living soar far more than incomes did. That's the impoverishment that lower and middle-income Americans are struggling with. They call it affordability when it's just not enough income because there weren't enough jobs being recovered and reclaimed after the lockdowns. And moreover, wealthier Americans had more ways to protect themselves from the supply shock effect on cost of living. They owned financial assets which soared in value far more than consumer prices did. So while labor was being devalued, higher incomes and higher income Americans had more ways to protect themselves from the consequences, while lower and middle income Americans had no way to shelter from the price effect, the lost purchasing power. So for the vast majority of people and their counterparts around the world, this is not just a US unique problem, they saw their one major asset get degraded, their labor. The value of their labor got devalued. It lost a ton of ground and never caught up. And Macy's is starting to realize this, as is Delta Airlines. Worse, the worst part, what both of those companies are saying here is that they don't expect this to change. On the contrary, they're preparing for it to get worse. And that's also what we see in the labor data. Employers are letting go more payrolls, which will make consumer spending even weaker, leading to more job losses, less income, and even less spending, and on that goes. Flatter and flatter beverage. So labor income was devalued in 2021, but now workers are going to get hit with a double whammy in 2025 and likely 2026, with job losses and the prospect for even more. They already paid once in the lost purchasing power, and now they have to pay again in unemployment because businesses have finally started to figure out consumer impoverishment isn't going to magically get better with rate cuts or some kind of fiscal policy. This can't be fixed with interest rates or some kind of government action. The truth of the matter is, the truth no one wants to admit, this is an unhealthy economic situation which is getting sicker by the year, by the month it actually seems. And a lot of people can sense that's the case. A lot of people can feel that's the case, and a lot of businesses are getting with the program, which is why we're seeing more and more job losses. Again, not 2009 level of job losses right now. What we're seeing is that employers they're finally coming to grips with and figuring out this economy is not going in the right direction, and it is not going to go in the right direction. It was impoverished years ago, and we have to pay for the consequences of all that. Yet all we hear from the mainstream is look at the record high stock price, or at best, some might point to this and say it's a two-speed economy, as if somehow that makes it any better or explain what's really going on. No, this sucker is a sick economy that long ago forgot how to grow, and in 2025 began remembering how to fire workers. That part has been covered up under euphemisms, misdirection, and of course, the idea the Fed will somehow solve everything with lower Fed funds targets. Now remember, the Fed has been cutting its policy rates since September 2024. September 2024. And what has the labor market been doing that entire time? Getting worse anyway. Maybe doing so too slowly for some people's expectations, but the reality is the confirmation, the data and evidence all shows this thing is getting sicker and sicker. Macy's knows it, Delta knows it, hell, even the BLS knows it. And the BLS numbers actually show it. And as we know, the flat beverage and flatter beverage is feeding into the downside of the credit cycle. And I went over the 3 stages of a credit cycle downswing in the video link below. As always, thank you very much for joining me. Join me next month, Eurodollar University Live, link in the description for that. Huge thanks to Eurodollar University members and subscribers. And until next time, take care.